Welcome to my spoiler-free review from memory of the 2003 video game Freedom Fighters. The game is rated R, and for mature rather, so this video B. I'm not going to spoil anything about the game in this video, and yeah, I really love this game. Like, nearly everything that I've played IO Interactive, which is from the very start up to and including Hitman 2016. Really, Mini Ninjas is the only one that I don't love. And one of the things that I've always appreciated about them, and one of the things that make me, as much as I do love, love the Hitman games, Absolution less so. I wish that they had made, or will make, they are still making games, but maybe in the future they will make more, like, things that aren't Hitman games, which sounds weird as such a big fan of the Hitman franchise, but still. Because when they do make something that isn't Hitman, it tends to be equally as interesting as Hitman. And once again, like, I do think Mini Ninjas is the only time that they've made a game that I didn't think was super impressive. Like, they made a couple of really major mistakes with that one. And I guess it's not impossible that I will change my mind once I play, the two most recent Hitman games, but I kind of doubt it based on what I've heard. But yeah, obviously everything I say in this video where I talk IO is about the games that I have played, not the few that I haven't yet. Like, I would argue every single IO Interactive game, one of the strengths is there is a very straightforward elevator pitch for it. And in the case of this one, it is Red Dawn, the video game. And if you happen to not be too familiar with that one, I'll grant I'm only aware of it through pop cultural osmosis. You could also, maybe you're primarily a gamer, maybe you don't know that much about movies. You could also think of it as Red Alert 1 set in the US and as a first-person shooter. And yeah, if neither of those set your soul on fire, yeah, the game's just not for you. And that's fine. That's 100% okay. It does amuse me the way that some of these jingoistic games set in America will be when they're not necessarily made by Americans, because this is also something, there's also something to chew on in some of the Splinter Cell, which at least some, made by, like, I want to say French developers, but yeah, this was made by Danish people, and I've noted before, we have this, like, there's this poem from some decades back that, relates to the relationship about, referring to America as sort of an older brother. Like, there's a lot of Danish culture that sort of looks up in admiration to American culture. But yeah, there's definitely some traits here where, yeah, it is the way, like, we non-Americans perhaps view America, which I don't want to put it all in one place. I'll try to spread it out over the course of the video. But I think let's start with, right, just real quick, obviously, so I don't even know if it was released for anything else, but I played this on PC. I had a disc, I have a disc, I still have it out, but somewhere around here I have a disc. It is also now on digital. I own it on Steam. I've only briefly run it, but it seems to run completely smoothly. Very impressive. Right out of the box, too. I didn't have to do anything. And it was relatively recently. I think it's not a huge amount of years ago. The year that the game is over 20 years old. I think it's less than a decade since it was added to digital. So that also perhaps helps with, they made some changes. I certainly remember last time I tried to play it from disk, I had to jump through hoops to get it to run even a little bit, and it, crashed to desktop pretty quickly. And yeah, so, if you are deciding these days between digital and disk, I would definitely say digital is the way to go. Now, basically, one of the reasons why I specifically went with Red Alert, because I do appreciate, there are other games that are about, yeah, Cold War paranoia, but both games open with a cutscene that explains some of the alternate history. And yeah, it's like genuinely the very start of this game. This was back when that was something that IO Interactive liked to do with their video games. It opens with this, like, it's cinematic. Yeah, actually, I'll just very briefly go into, so we can tell from right away that we're looking at something underwater, and it's not terribly many seconds before we realize, oh, this is like a submarine. And it culminates in it emerging, I guess, opposite of submerging, and it's right in front of the Statue of Liberty. So very much like, the opening cutscene of, actually, I want to say that's Red Alert 2, but this one is less goofy. Yeah, less goofy than that game, and certainly isn't trying to be as goofy as that one was, and succeeded at. I love the gameplay. I don't necessarily love the tone of that game. Anyway, yeah, and so over, as the camera follows, and is mostly underwater, we get these like dates of, and so apparently in the world of this game, World War II was ended when the USSR nuked the Nazis, and after that we get several, like, I certainly noticed that at least some of the years they mention as these important things happening were times where something significant happened, in our actual, world history. So I'm pretty sure that was deliberate, and it culminates with, we're told in 2001 there was a foiled assassination attempt on the US president. An unnamed foreign nation was involved. And finally it says, I think it was yesterday. I don't think it was today, but, and, it was released in 2003. They expected most people to be playing it at that time. Obviously it feels a little silly if, booting it up today and seeing that, but whatever. Yeah, yesterday, all US cities had low-flying drone sightings, but the government says these are just weather balloons. Just fucking wonderful. Yeah, even in 2003, there was this thing of like, listen, I'm sorry, if the government isn't prepared to deal with it, they're gonna fucking lie about it. Like, are we kidding? Let's just be honest about that. And then, as you start up once you've selected difficulty setting and such, do note, as far as I could tell, you can only have one profile per computer on this. But, and let's see, it has auto saving. Right now, I forget if it has a level selector. I know it has. I guess that's a spoiler. Okay, never mind. But the yeah, and it has 4 different difficulty settings. So there's some chance that you can get something out of this, and might challenge you. Yeah, which even if you're whether you're a noob or elite. And yeah, as you start it up, you find that you are a plumber, and your buddy plumber, a raging misogynist, is talking about how he finds the head of the, he finds attractive the this woman that is speaking out against the commies. And the player character literally says that the entire idea of the Soviet Union having this much, like he describes, the other one is talking about like, well, what about South America being taken over by the Soviet Union? And the player character, whose name escapes me at the moment, I'm afraid my wrist is too fucking sore to look it up right now, is like, I don't believe in conspiracy theories, which once again, like, listen, I'm not saying we Danes are right about everything. Sometimes we nail it. We hit the nail on the head. That is 100% reflective of like the average American. And I just kind of love how, like, from what I understand, this game did pretty well. There's enough in there that the regular American didn't feel insulted by, so we got away with like saying, you fucking, like, this is what you think, right? This is what you look like to us. Do you understand that? Do you understand that we get the news, we see how you act, this is how you appear to us? And that's just very Danish to be yeah. But yeah, by the end of the opening cutscene, you've seen that I want to say her name is Isabella, the protester leader. She's not in her apartment because you're going there to help with plumbing, but she certainly packed, it looks like she was in a hurry to get out of there, and I guess she had to, maybe leave before even being able to finish packing. And your plumber buddy is arrested because they assume, they're a dictatorship. That was the problem with the USSR. It wasn't the communism, it was the dictatorship part. And I'm absolutely not making any excuses for the, they did some horrible things. Many horrible things, tens of millions dead. Now, they don't believe the plumber when he, and there's also this kind of almost comedic bit where, they ask, where's your girlfriend, Isabella? And he's like, well, she's not my girlfriend. I mean, she's hot, but yeah. And so he's dragged off by them, but they do not catch the player character. They don't even realize he's in there. He was, hiding. He didn't make a noise, and they only, they didn't check thoroughly. He was in the bedroom. And that, of course, immediately has you as the player thinking, like, I gotta free my buddy. He tried to warn me about this shit. I wasn't paying attention. It's also pretty funny. One of the last things he says to you before he's captured is, one of these days, actually, I think he specifically says, tomorrow, you're going to wake up under a Russian flag, and you're not going to think it's a conspiracy theory. And, at that point, so you think, I gotta save him. And you maybe think to yourself, wait, am I a fucking coward? Like, could I have done something? Would it have made any sense? Because they have guns, I'm just a fucking plumber. And I'm by myself. There were several armed men in there, so I gotta free him. I gotta help, And so the next part is from memory. I played these two opening videos just before I started recording this video. The rest of this is from memory, but I do distinctly remember because it made an impression. After that, you're running through, you leave the apartment and you run through some of the streets and you see just the chaos. And it's, of course, carefully scripted, but it really works, as the Russians are taking over America. And it is the kind of thing that just, it works so well to open a video game like that because, like, immediately, a lot of people are going to want to fight back against this, but yeah. And I think that's as much as I'm going to talk plot, but yeah, I think it's a very effective hook. They do quite a good job with that whole thing. And yeah, so genre-wise, this is a tactical third-person shooter. And as a third-person shooter, it was... So, they actually, come to think of it, I think this was the first non-Hitman game they made. They had made 2 Hitman games. before this one. And IO Interactive, so those two Hitman, the first two Hitman games, there are times where you might, well, at least some of the time, you do find yourself shooting. They are also stealth games, but they're, yeah. And this was one where they, just made it about the shooting itself. And as such, that brings us to that. I really have very few major issues with this one, and they don't sink it. This is a game I've played all the way through. It's got to be at least twice by now. I distinctly remember the second time, so it's got to be at least twice. And I would probably have played all the way through it again today if I didn't have such a ridiculous backlog. Like, we are literally talking, I have several hundred games, which is part of why I try to do a video about a game once a week these days, so it's not going to take an actual eternity to get through all of them. But the, one of the only negatives I have about this is the same one that is also true of the first two Hitman games, and thankfully, I believe the third one, Contracts, I believe that is where they fixed it, but I don't know why they thought that the fucking recoil was not awful, but it is, something that is, the last time that I went back and purposefully replayed one of the early ones of Hitman games, I did not start. I did not do the first two. I started with the third. And last time I played Kane Lynch, I also played, I played the second one, not the first one. And that is the thing. This one in some ways is like a proto Kane Lynch one. And that is probably why we don't have a sequel to this one, which in a way is too bad, but at the same time, I will definitely say, like, there is more complexity to, Kane Lynch, even the second one, actually, and the emotional engagement. Like, if this one's like 4 out of 10, then that one's an 11, especially the first one. Yeah, I guess the second one's probably closer to like an 8, maybe a 7. But yeah, this is more about like, you got to get those damn, Soviets. You got to stop them. So there's a catharsis to it, but it's not really one that you're like, yeah, like, actually, yeah, come to think of it, I think the last time I played this and the last time I played Kane Lynch 1, I think it's about the same amount of years, more or less, between. But I remember that much, much better than this. So, yeah. Now, I think, and it's not even that I've played that one that many more times from what I recall. I'm not even sure anyway, we're going to move on. As a third-person shooter, once again, it's been a while, I didn't, it's been a while since I sat down and actually played this, but from what I recall, it's fine. I wouldn't necessarily say that at this point IO Interactive had completely mastered gameplay that, if not for a fascinating, world or like other features than the, features that were, if we are purely looking at, is it fun to run and gun in this video game? They got there. I mean, I would probably say the first time they really nailed it was Hitman Contracts, but when this was released, they weren't quite there. Fortunately, this has something that I've seen some others do. Actually, yeah, I mean, it's probably not quite the first to do it. Yeah, no, because anyway, another game that I saw have similar was the first-person shooter Star Wars Republic Commando. And it's one of those cases where, that one doesn't have the recoil and it has the IP. Other than that, I would say they're about equally equally good overall, I would probably say. It really depends on which of these you find more appealing or yeah, IP recoil, yeah. Anyway, I should probably finish the fucking thought before I go into all this other. Anyway, yeah, the thing it has is that you control you can you can order around some other of the yeah the rebels, and you can have them follow you. You can indicate an area they're supposed to attack, and there is also a defend command. I forget if that means stay put and defend, or if you're also pointing to a place and saying defend that area. But yeah, and with this fairly simple, it's not a huge amount, but it's enough that you feel like you are really having an impact. And you do have to very carefully think about when to give what order, because you can absolutely accidentally get all your own people killed and have to redo a section if you are just, so yeah. And that is, of course, one of the things I do know about Red Dawn is that part of it is the fact that it is indeed a group of people, because like they could have made like Rambo's Red Dawn or something, but they specifically said, no, together is how we're going to get this, And that is, of course, also something, the command thing is something they also used, again, in the first Kane Lynch. Not the second, and I think the second doesn't really need it. I guess that does pretty much... Yeah, so the characters, from what I recall, even the ones that I didn't see in the opening, from what I recall, they are pretty much archetypes. This one is not one where they're trying to carefully draw, which again I do think is a bit of a sly thing about like these Americans. They're not gonna fucking want deep. It feels like you are playing a 1980s action flick, and I don't know. I kind of think that's a very fun way to make a shooter game. I'm not saying all of them have to, but certainly that worked well for Duke Nukem 3D. Shadow Warrior, so it's yeah, but yeah, I think that does pretty much get us to the so the it's a appropriate length, and it is one of those games where okay, you'll have to double check this if you really want to. If I am remembering correctly, there's a reward if you beat this. I think it might be on the highest difficulty. I'm sure someone can give you details. I just want you to know, if you are enjoying playing this, there's something very cool if you do. I don't remember if it requires the highest difficulty setting. I don't think it's just from beating it on the easiest though, but yeah, I'm sure someone has put it somewhere online, and someone whose wrists aren't really fucking sore right now can find it. They do a pretty good job streamlining the controls here. That is something that they would sometimes, there was a little bit of a, mixed record. I am willing to admit there's at least a little bit of awkwardness in the controls for Hitman 1, as much as I fucking love that game. But with this one, they did quite a good job. Also, this does something that I wanted them to do for Hitman 2, so I am not going to belabor the point. I'll just briefly restate, because I talked about in at least one of my videos talking about Hitman 2, but in Hitman 2, they decided to add a melee attack even if you don't have a knife in your hand. Like in the first one, you can only melee attack if you have a weapon, a melee weapon, rather. In this, Like, I had forgotten that it was even a thing in this game, but I did briefly check, and yeah, you can indeed hit, even if you, like at the very start, you just have your fists, and yeah, you can melee attack at will. In Hitman 2, it is not on a separate button. It automatically happens if the enemy is too close to you, even though it is fairly rarely what you actually want. And keep in mind, some enemies will like literally run close to you, so it's like, well, I was trying to, pull the trigger. I wasn't trying to smack him in the face. It's yeah. And yeah, they've done it since this. Actually, I had totally forgotten that it was this early, because certainly there's also melee in Hitman 2016, but then, some of the ones in between do not necessarily have it. But yeah. And yeah, other than that, it's very straightforward. I'm not going to go over every single bit of the controls. I'm just saying they did a pretty good job streamlining it so that it's not like you don't have to spend forever memorizing them. And I suppose, yeah, this does only have the single player, and I do appreciate that. Is also something I really respect about IO Interactive. I've never felt like they forced multiplayer into one of their games just for that appeal. And I will acknowledge part of the reason I feel like that is because it's pretty self-evident when you look across their catalog, because like, let's see, what of their games have multiplayer? I swear I'm not going to spend forever. Yeah, both Kane Lynch games, and I believe at least one of the two Hitman games I haven't played yet. I think that's it. I don't think even Mini Ninjas does. So yeah, and let's see. I didn't get to play multiplayer in Kane Lynch 1, but the Kane Lynch 2 multiplayer, the thing is, I guess it's possible that it's been years since I last played multiplayer. The problem back then was finding enough players, but it was a lot of fun. But yeah, I don't think this would have made a huge amount of sense in multiplayer, because like as soon as you have the ordering around gameplay element, that feature, it's like, well, what do you do with multiplayer? I mean, okay, hypothetically, you could have like asymmetric, where you have one or more players storming an area, and one or more players opposing them, trying to like make sure that the defenses are good or something like that. But I don't think that this particular game would work super well for that. Like, don't get me wrong, like I love see, I forget which at least one of the Unreal Tournament games I absolutely love playing like that for, but very, very different game. I'll admit that it's been so long that I really don't remember about the weapons in this, but from what I recall, it's fairly straightforward. Yeah, I don't remember there being anything that felt out of place, or offhand recall anything missing that I really felt like, oh, you really needed that in there. And yeah, the enemy, fighting the enemies is, entertaining, and they make sure they look like the kind of stereotypical, Soviet troops. And their AI is good. At least I certainly don't remember feeling like it was super easy. That's also something they tend to do well, IO. But yeah, and it does have that element of, you're outnumbered, so you're going to have to be really careful about what you order your people to do. And I remember it uses checkpoint saving. I do not remember how far apart the saves are, but from what I remember, they do a pretty good job of making it, like there are areas where you might have to do it multiple times before you can complete it, but it tends to be fairly rewarding. Like, it's satisfying when you get to a place where you can get all the way through an area. Once again, something IO excel at. It is quite linear, and I think that works for it. And it was also just interesting because, like, at this point, that wasn't really something we expected from IO. You know, run and gun linear was not exactly something that was, at least not the selling point of those first two Hitman games. It was possible, at least some of the time, but like in those, you know, even, you know, it got significantly better over the course of them outside of Absolution. But even in that first one, like, sometimes people forget, like, there are actually, don't get me wrong, like, if you're just starting it out and you don't have a high tolerance for frustrating game elements, skip the first one, like, for sure. Like, I would probably say the third one, Contracts, is a good place to start if you're going with the old ones. But if you're just attracted to the three new ones, start with, you know, Hitman 2016, or I don't know, it's possible that it makes more sense to start with 2 or 3, but you know, the two most recent ones. But anyway, the yeah, it was fun seeing them challenge themselves, and this certainly worked out significantly better than when Westwood tried their hand at a first-person shooter with Renegade. At some point, I will do a review of that one as well. Yeah, I guess that does pretty much cover the the linearity allows them to control the pacing more, and you do really feel like, you know, as you play through this, you're making progress. Like, you're really, you know, making sure that the Russians don't just walk all over America. I guess I should say I don't have a problem with the Russian people. I genuinely feel bad for them with all these terrible fucking leaders for, like, I guess almost forever. Like, it's I hope, I don't know if it's too optimistic, but hopefully one day Russia will be properly democratic. You know, it would be wonderful. Well, let's see, were they briefly before Putin? I forget if that was an actual democracy or if they still had some issues. But you know, hopefully at some point in the future they will become a consistent democracy. Maybe that could happen to America too. And the atmosphere is very nicely done. I mean, I have not spent a huge amount of time in America, but there are times where this game does somewhat feel like you are actually running through, you know, American, you know, yeah. And let's see, so the cutscenes are in-engine, and they do a good job on just, you know, yeah, like they have a sense for cinematic storytelling. You know, that was, again, something IO mastered right from that first Hitman game. They just understand, you know, and listen, I get today that's, you know, a lot of big games will have that. Back then, like, I think, you know, some people don't remember the year 2000. Some people haven't been born yet or weren't old enough to form long-term memories. And that makes me feel old, but I remember, like, there were games back then where it was like, you know, yeah, like, you know, games like this and Half-Life 1 were a fucking revelation. Yes, Half-Life 1 review coming up. I have decided not to promise an exact date, just in case, but I am definitely going to do one. Now, I guess that pretty much, yes, that gets us to the graphics. So, best I can tell, this is a, you know, at least slightly modified version of the same engine for Hitman 2. And as such, it's aged pretty well considering how old it is. Like, I know games that are only 5 years old that have not aged as well as this, and where you do actually have to do a bunch of shit to get it to run smoothly today. You know, when it was first released, it was mind-blowing. You know, we were in awe of the level of detail and such. And by today's standards, of course, it's very dated. But yeah, you know, I wouldn't definitely not say that it looks downright bad. And it is also possible that it would if you try to run it off a disk and you do succeed, but certainly the digital version that I booted up earlier, yeah. And it is a little interesting to me how much the protagonist kind of looks like Agent 47, Hitman with hair. I don't know. Maybe they just felt like keeping that. I will acknowledge they changed more than just hairline, but there certainly is a certain resemblance. And yeah, I don't have too much else to say about that. Yeah, I mean, I already mentioned, there's some scripted events. As you are running through the streets and such, you see like parts of buildings be blown up and such. And yeah, the engine handles this very well. That was another area where this somewhat reminded me of. I already mentioned Half-Life 1, And also, if I recall correctly, I believe you are controlling the character as you witness this destruction, rather than it being, a cutscene. And the sound design is quite good. Guns and such sound, there's a kick to them. And the music, when I first booted this up, as I was listening to the opening music, I was like, is that Jesper Kyd? And literally within a second, that credit came up on screen. And yeah, I try not to make too big a deal out of, I do think we Danes, I'm not taking credit for it. I think some Danish people have done really impressive things, and yeah, Jesper Kyd is one of them. And he did such a great job making music that, like, gets your blood boiling as, like, oh, I'm going to stop these guys, but also, like, incorporates the kind of stereotypical Soviet sound, so there is that, like, it feels like the music is part of the oppression of you, and yeah, just fantastic creative decision. And yeah, so some of the challenge definitely does come from the shitty recoil, but I have definitely also had a lot of enjoyable times as far as this, like, forcing me to really be careful in how I approach, fighting. Yeah, so good job on that. And it is also, engaging, if not, like, in an emotionally deep way. And yeah, I mean, ultimately it doesn't have a huge amount of replayability. Yeah, and I guess that does also bring us to, so one of the other really big things is the fact that the ending here, just, I don't know if they were really, if I had to guess, I think they figured that there would be a sequel. But the ending is definitely not completely satisfying. There's one major element, especially, and I'm not spoiling it. I mean, I'm fairly confident you can very easily find out online if you want to know. But the, yeah, it wasn't something that, like, I do distinctly remember, playing it through the second time. I was like, oh, wait, is that how it ends? But yeah. It's one of those more about the journey than the destination things. Now, I think that does... Yeah, so, right, the setting, you are running around various... it is in America, and you can tell they know what the look and feel of America is. I forget if this was one of those cases where they actually went there, or if they're basing it off on, like, movies or something, but yeah, they capture the vibe of it. It does not feel like Canada standing in for America, at least to me. And the level design is good. I, always felt like, if that, yeah, another area that I tend to do well at. And yeah, they do a good job on environmental storytelling. Like, you get a real sense of the things that have transpired here. And yeah, I feel like that covers everything. So yeah, just a genuinely, quite the success, I would say, creatively, for what they were going for. This is also one of those cases where, like, if they had made it like this really deep thing, then probably wouldn't have, it would have felt off for what they're trying to do, and by this point they'd already proven that, yeah, they can do stuff that is deeper. Both of those first two Hitman games definitely have, much more in that regard. Yeah, I rate this 8 freedom fighters, freedom fighting, a freedom fight worth freedom fighting out of 10.